dead believers in Christ. But what is the church in its nature? This word is mentioned in Matthew for the very first time, so disciples had no clue before that what the term meant. The most appropriate term for the congregation of believers at the time of Jesus was what? Synagogue. They were all Jewish disciples. They were all good Jewish boys that went every Saturday to the synagogue. Synagoge is a Greek term meaning coming together or gathering together. So they were gathering in the synagogue, but the synagogue was not so much a religious institution. It was an institution that came from the exile of the Jewish nation. When they were in exile in Babylon and Assyria, they decided, since they didn't have a temple or schools or social clubs, to create an institution of synagogue, where somebody could come and teach, somebody could come and share their thoughts, somebody could come and learn Hebrew, somebody could come and learn about the culture, somebody could come and fellowship or receive some monetary help or help with food or material possessions and so on and so forth. So it wasn't entirely the community of faith. Well, here it is absolutely a new program that Jesus is introducing to his disciples. And it is a revolutionary community of faith. It's not a social gathering, it's a community of faith. The church, ecclesia, as I promised we are going to come back to the definition of this term, means the called out ones. So these people were called out, some from the synagogues, some from the government, some from the army, some from the tax collectors. They were called out from different institutions, from different margins of the society into one place. And it was a replacement model for synagogue. We know from the New Testament that disciples still attended synagogues. They still taught in the synagogues. But when we encounter the more Gentile church in Antioch, we already see that these are Gentiles. They're not culturally bound to synagogues, so they need a new community. And the community of faith called church was perfect for them. And that's who Paul ministers for most of his life. So what is the nature of the church that makes it unique and different from any other institution? Well, first of all, Jesus called Jews and Gentiles to be together in the church as equal. Jews were not higher than Gentiles or Gentiles higher than Jews. Everybody came together as equal. Men and women were together as equal. If you go to a Jewish synagogue or Muslim Islamic mosque, you will see men and women are always separate. Sometimes their women are hidden out of place, out of sight, somewhere on the balcony or somewhere in another section of the building, but only men fellowship together in the main sanctuary. So this was not so about the church. Women were prominent in the church. Men were fellowshipping with women, worshiping with women, ministering side by side. So it was revolutionary for that time and day. Rich and poor were together as equal. Can you imagine somebody driving up on, Cadillac Escalade and somebody on beat up Civic like I have, and they all park next to each other and nobody said, oh, look at this piece of junk, or oh wow, look at this Cadillac. No, they came to, hey, this is my kind of special, this is yours. We're equal in the body of Christ. We all accept each other as brother and sister. The society of the ancient Roman world lived by the ethics of honor and shame. So those who were in honorable positions, such as officials, chief priests, Pharisees, Sadducees, Herodians, or maybe rich people, they considered themselves more honorable. People with any kind of defect were considered to be as shameful. If you missed a limb, or if you were missing something in your life, you were poor or you were a beggar, you were in a position of shame. You were viewed down upon or looked down upon because these people were considered to be undesirables. They were not accepted in synagogues. They were kicked to the back of the synagogue so nobody can see them. If somebody was missing a hearing, or was missing an eyesight, the only thing they could do is be in a position of shame, be beggars. They could not be a productive members of the society. And the church made it all different because everybody in the church was treated as equal. And that was revolutionary. Kings and slaves together were also considered as equal. We don't meet too many kings in the Bible that were treated as equally, but we know from the church history that Emperor Constantine of the Roman Empire became a Christian, and apparently wherever he was going to church, he was probably treated as equal, brethren in Christ. Not somebody who was just a king. Maybe as soon as he exited the church, he was treated with all the honors of the king, but not in the boundaries of the church. In this Jesus' proclamation, he makes it clear that the church as an institution is created as the opposition to the term gates of Hades or gates of hell. Why is it so? Because Jesus is trying to explain to us, why is he calling us to be disciples? What is the purpose of us to follow him and imitate him? And this purpose is summarized here with the following statements. Church will be built on a strong foundation and elevated over the gates of hell in a threatening manner. If you build something on your enemy's territory, isn't that a threatening manner? Remember how Muslims were trying to build their mosque right at where 9/11 took place? Because for Muslim religion, Islam, it's considered to be a sign of victory if they build a mosque where they have just created a terrorist act or conquered somebody. In fact, anytime Muslims conquer some country, they rebuild all the churches into mosques. The greatest cathedral of Sophia in Turkey was the Greek Orthodox Cathedral. It's built into a magnificent mosque. All the crosses were torn apart, all the icons on the interior of the building were erased, and all the Islamic drawings were made present. So anytime Islam touches some other religion or conquers it, it destroys every mention of that, or any mention of it. The church is also created to make advances against the gates of hell and to free its captives. And we're going to discuss what are the gates, what are we talking about? What do you mean gates of hell? Or what function do they play? And so on and so forth. We'll discuss that a little bit later. Church is also designated as an attacking force and not so much defensive. Sometimes we feel so comfortable sitting on Sunday morning on our pews and they're like, well, what a good time, what a good worship, praise and worship, it's like, when we're coming out, oh, okay, so 9 o'clock tomorrow morning, I guess, see you next Sunday. But it wasn't so in the first century AD. The church was supposed to go out and only come on Sunday to share their victories, to share what happened in their life, to share how they were able to testify about Christ, to come back and be joyful and rejoice about everything that was going on throughout the week. So, and now we're coming to the gates, ancient city gates. This is the modern day restoration of the gates of Damascus. As you can see, huge towers towering over this entrance with places for some bow masters to be around so they can shoot somebody standing right at the gate. There's also a window right above the gate where they can pour hot tar on people that are trying to ram the gate or enter the city. So what was the function of the gates in the ancient days? And we're talking about Old Testament and all the way throughout the modern days up until maybe 19th century when brick and stone fortifications had no sense of even building because modern day technology can destroy them with one shot from a cannon or a howitzer. So what is the function of the gates? Well, first of all, they were created to limit access to the unwanted people, right? You see some lepers coming around, or some people that have a communicable disease. You don't want them in. You don't want them to come and infestate the whole city. So they were kept outside of city gates. They were kept in their own little communities, their own little communes. They were treated as marginalized or shameful people, so they could not come into the gates. The gates were also created to keep people inside the city walls, right? Either to protect them from oncoming armies of enemies, or to just keep them in control. Remember the whole Cold War era and the Iron Curtain that was separating the Western world from the Eastern world? Well, I was behind that Iron Curtain on the other side. And I wanted to, pull it out a little bit to peek in, see how the Western world lives. No, it was solid. You couldn't peek out of that curtain. You were pretty much in closed society. You couldn't do anything. So the gates were created to keep people inside. They were also created to defend from the intruders, from the armies of the enemies, or somebody who was trying to come raid the city and flee. They were also created together as a city council inside the gates. The gates complexes of the ancient days were so complex, sometimes they composed of 6 to 10 different office buildings inside the gates where people would sit. There will be a place for the court clerk, there will be a place for tax collectors, there will be a place for the city officials or rulers making laws, deciding what law a city needs to vote for in order to change the life of its citizens. Then the hearings of the court were held actually inside the gates. They would drag somebody caught in the market, probably stealing. They would drag them to the city gates, and the city officials would decide what the destiny of this individual will be, what they should do with this individual. Either they will just kick him out of the city and say, "Don't ever come back here no more," or they will put him in prison if the crime was deserving that. The city gates also were like a municipal building. From here, the city was governed by the rulers. That's where taxes were collected from all the incoming and outgoing merchants. The taxes were collected and dues from the citizens that were either trading or living in the city on a daily basis. That's how the city was able to sustain itself. And it was also created to provide security for the city at night. So when the night fell, all the gates would close. Everybody who was on the outside would remain on the outside. They would never let anybody in, because that moment when the gates are opening, the enemy could take advantage and enter the city and destroy its residents. So, and also they were setting boundaries. You know how Jerusalem, when it was still a walled city, it set boundaries. Okay, outside of Jerusalem, so little villages and towns. Inside, that's citizens of Jerusalem. So if you were outside in little villages and towns, you were probably destroyed, annihilated by the enemy, because you were not protected by the walls and the gates. While inside of Jerusalem, if you were lucky, then you were protected by the army, by the gates, by the walls, and everything else associated with that. So what is the metaphoric understanding or metaphoric use of the word gates? Gates as a term is often used to identify the rulers and leaders of the city-states, who often sat at the gates to judge and to pass the laws. In Psalms or in Proverbs, you often hear the phrases, "O ancient gates, lift up your hands," or "lift up and rejoice and open up the way to the Messiah," and so on and so forth. The gates, as physical item, cannot lift up its hands or do anything. It has to be actuated by people that are controlling the gates. So therefore, gates are often associated with a metaphorical understanding of people behind them, or the people who operate them, meaning the rulers and principalities and so on and so forth. Remember, Paul says that our battle is not against flesh and blood, again the same expression, flesh and blood, but against powers and principalities of evil. Now, we're not talking about the evil rulers